No. Thank you. Anyway, having been killed at Bosworth, Henry VII brings back the body to the town, to Leicester, where Richard's army only a few days earlier marched from. And the body's placed on display for 3 days to show that Richard is dead, he's no longer king, and the victor of the battle, Henry VII, is now King of England. After 3 days, Richard's body is taken down and given to 3 people who are referred to as friars. Now, at this point it's probably worthwhile saying something about the town that Richard had been brought back to. It was a relatively small but prosperous town that still lay within the walls of the Roman town that had been established some 1,300 years earlier. Obviously those walls have been patched up, so that's how you get this sort of rectangular shape that you see when you have a look at the map and the illustration. Now this medieval town would have contained 5 churches and 3 institutions known as friaries. Now, does anybody know what the difference between a friary and an abbey might be? Anybody can hazard a guess? No?
Friary and an abbey.
Friary. No.
A friary and an abbey.
Right.
Friars in charge of a friary.
No. The big difference between an abbey or a priory, and on one hand, and a friary on the other, is that abbeys, priories and so on, were closed institutions and surrounded by domes.
Oh, sorry, not that one. It's the one that's
They were closed institutions. They were places where the monks could pray and contemplate in isolation, whereas priories and the friars within them had a different remit. Their remit was to preach the local townsfolk. You'll always find priories in towns, and abbeys maybe in a town, maybe miles away from anywhere at all. And as part of this big difference between friaries and priories, you'll find that the church is divided into 2. The bigger part of the church, the western part of the church, the public could enter and attend services, whereas the eastern end, the small bit, would have been reserved for the friars, and they would have had a choir there and a high altar and all that sort of institution of the church. Now, we know that Richard was placed in the eastern end of the church, the private bit, because 10 years after he was killed and buried, Henry VII, who had now by this time become firmly established as king, pays for an alabaster chest tomb to be inscribed and placed over the burial spot, which would probably have some wall marker over the grave, but not an ornate one like a chest tomb. So at that point there was a clear marker of where Richard's grave lay. But what happened 50 years later? Henry VII's son, Henry VIII, falls out with the Pope, and as a consequence he establishes a separate church, the Church of England, and he sells off the land, all the religious houses, so that many of them, as happens here, the church is totally removed, demolished, and all the church, the stone and all the ornaments and all the valuables are sort of given off and passed over to other people. And all trace of the grave is lost. But we now believe that we've found the grave as Thank you.